This is going to trigger every empath watching, but I need to say it. You, the person who feels everyone's pain, who absorbs others' emotions, who prides yourself on your compassion, you have one of the darkest shadows in human psychology. Carl, Jung discovered something about empaths that the spiritual community doesn't want to discuss. The very traits that make you an empath, that sensitivity, that boundaryless compassion, that emotional absorption, create a shadow so dark, so denied, that it can destroy you from within. Today, I'm revealing why empaths specifically develop the most intense shadows, and what happens when that darkness finally erupts. But first, let me shatter the biggest misconception. Being an empath isn't the spiritual gift you've been told it is. It's often a trauma response. And that trauma response creates a shadow that's uniquely dangerous because it hides behind the identity of being the healing, loving one. The empath identity and its dark foundation. Let's start with an uncomfortable truth. Most people who identify as empaths develop this trait not as a spiritual gift, but as a survival mechanism. When you grow up in chaos, dysfunction, or with narcissistic caregivers, you learn to read micro-expressions, energy shifts, and emotional undercurrents because your safety depends on it. You become hypervigilant to others' emotions because you needed to predict and manage the unpredictable. This isn't empathy. It's hypervigilance dressed up as a spiritual gift. True empathy is a choice. What most empaths experience is compulsive emotional fusion born from trauma. And here's where Jung's insight becomes crucial. When your identity is built on trauma response, your shadow contains everything that threatens that identity. For empaths, the shadow holds all the selfish, cruel, indifferent parts that would have threatened your survival in a dysfunctional system. While others might repress normal amounts of selfishness or anger, empaths repress these qualities to an extreme degree. The result? A shadow of extraordinary darkness, Jung's discovery. About empathic shadows, Jung noticed something fascinating in his highly sensitive patients. The more someone identified with being caring, compassionate, and emotionally attuned, the more vicious their unconscious material. He found that empaths' dreams were often filled with violence, cruelty, and indifference that shocked the dreamers. Their shadows didn't just contain ordinary selfishness. They contained its extreme opposite. Why? Because shadow formation follows a law of compensation. The more extremely you identify with one pole, the more extremely the opposite pole constellates in your unconscious. If you're moderately kind, your shadow contains moderate selfishness. But if you're compulsively self-sacrificing, if your entire identity rests on being the one who cares, your shadow contains equally extreme cruelty. Jung documented cases of healers who had dreams of torturing others, of caretakers who fantasized about abandoning everyone, of empaths whose unconscious was filled with psychopathic indifference. Not because they were bad people, but because their conscious identity was so one-sided that the psyche created an equally one-sided compensation. The 5 shadow traits every empath carries. Through analyzing hundreds of empathic patients, Jung and his followers identified 5 specific shadow traits that empaths universally carry. First, predatory selfishness. Not healthy self-care, but the extreme shadow of someone who's never put themselves first. This shadow doesn't want balance. It wants to take everything, give nothing, exploit without remorse. Empaths are horrified when this shadow surfaces. But it's the natural compensation for compulsive giving. Second, emotional sadism. The shadow of someone who feels everyone's pain contains the capacity to inflict pain without feeling. This is why empaths, when pushed too far, can say the most devastating things. They know exactly where it hurts because they feel it, and their shadow knows how to weaponize that knowledge. Third, cold indifference. The opposite of caring, too. Much is the capacity to feel nothing. Empaths' shadows contain a psychopathic coldness that terrifies them. In dreams, they might see themselves walking past suffering without a flicker of emotion. This isn't who they are. It's the compensation for who they force themselves to be. Fourth, narcissistic grandiosity. Empaths often secretly believe they're special, more evolved, more spiritual than others. This superiority hides in the shadow because it contradicts their humble, caring persona. But Jung found that empaths' shadows often contained massive egos, convinced of their own importance. Fifth, manipulative control. Empaths read emotions expertly. In the shadow, this ability becomes manipulation. The capacity to manage others' emotions for survival can become the capacity to control them for power. Many empaths discover their shadow has been subtly manipulating others all along, using emotional intelligence as a weapon. When the empath shadow erupts, what happens when these shadows can no longer be contained? I've seen it repeatedly, and it's always shocking. The gentle healer who suddenly abandons their family. The compassionate counselor who becomes emotionally abusive. The spiritual empath who turns into a cult leader. These aren't personality changes, they're shadow eruptions. Lisa was everyone's emotional support. The friend who always listened, always cared, always showed up. She prided herself on feeling others' pain and helping them heal. But the shadow was building. One day, after years of compulsive caretaking, she snapped. She didn't just set boundaries. She cut everyone off, deleted social media, changed her number, moved without telling anyone. Her shadow didn't want balance. It wanted revenge for years of self-abandonment. She went from feeling everything to feeling nothing, from caring about everyone to caring about no one. The pendulum swung to the opposite extreme because that's what happens when shadows erupt rather than integrate. The unique danger of the empath shadow. Here's why empath shadows are particularly dangerous. They hide behind a spiritual identity. Other people might recognize their selfishness or anger as shadow material needing integration. But empaths often spiritualize their dysfunction. I'm just so sensitive. I feel too much. I'm here to heal others. This spiritual bypassing prevents shadow work. How can you integrate selfishness when you believe your compulsive self-sacrifice is a divine gift? How can you own your cruelty when your identity depends on being the compassionate one? The very identity that creates the darkest shadow also prevents its integration. Moreover, the empath shadow is particularly good at projection. That narcissist you keep attracting, they're carrying your disowned grandiosity. That psychopath who fascinates you, they're embodying your repressed indifference. That selfish person who triggers you, they're living out your unlived self-care. The path to integration for empaths. So, how does an empath integrate such a dark shadow without becoming it? Jung's answer was careful, conscious integration. Not becoming cruel, but owning your capacity for cruelty. Not becoming selfish, but acknowledging your right to self-interest. Not becoming indifferent, but accepting that you can't save everyone. The work starts with admitting the truth. Your empathy isn't purely a gift. It's partially a trauma response. Your compulsive caretaking isn't just compassion. It's also control. Your emotional absorption isn't just sensitivity. It's also poor boundaries. This admission cracks the spiritual persona that keeps the shadow locked away. Next, you must find healthy expressions for shadow content. That predatory selfishness? Channel it into fierce self-care. That emotional sadism? Use it to set boundaries. That sting? That cold indifference? Apply it to situations that aren't yours to fix. That narcissistic grandiosity? Let it fuel belief in your own worth. That manipulative control? Transform it into conscious influence for good. Practical shadow work for empaths here are specific practices for empaths to integrate their dark shadows. The selfishness practice. Once daily, Choose yourself over someone else. Say no to a request. Take the last piece. Put your needs first. Feel the guilt and do it anyway. Your shadow needs proof that selfishness won't destroy you. The cruelty. Acknowledgement. Write about times you've had cruel thoughts. Not actions. Thoughts. The fantasy of telling someone exactly how pathetic they are. The imagination of walking away while someone needs you. Own these thoughts without shame. They're your shadow asking for recognition. The indifference meditation. Practice feeling nothing about others' problems. Sit with someone's story of struggle and consciously choose not to care. Not forever, just for that moment. Your shadow needs to know indifference is an option, not a default. The superiority journal. Write about why you're special, better than others, more evolved. Let your ego run wild on paper. Your shadow grandiosity needs expression to lose its unconscious power. The manipulation inventory. List every time you've used emotional intelligence to control outcomes. When you've played victim for sympathy. When you've given to get. This isn't judgment. It's integration. The transformed empath. What happens when an empath successfully integrates their dark shadow? They become what Jung called a conscious feeler. Someone who chooses when to feel, how much to feel, and when to stop feeling. They retain their sensitivity, but lose their compulsion. They can care deeply without drowning. They can help others without abandoning themselves. The integrated empath can access their full range, from compassion to indifference, from selflessness to selfishness, from care to cruelty. Not to live at the extremes, but to have choice. They can say, I see your pain, and I choose not to. Take it on. They can feel without fusion, care without compulsion, help without martyrdom. Most importantly, they stop attracting shadow carriers. When you own your darkness, you don't need others to carry it. The narcissists disappear. The energy vampires find other sources. The drama dissolves. Not because you've become cruel, but because you've become whole. Your shadow is your salvation. If you're an empath watching this with growing discomfort, good. That discomfort is your shadow knocking. Every judgment you're making about this video, but that's not me protest, that's your shadow speaking. The parts of you that insist you're purely loving, only caring, just sensitive, those are the guards keeping your darkness locked away. Your shadow isn't trying to turn you into a monster. It's trying to turn you into a complete human. Yes, you have extraordinary sensitivity, but you also have extraordinary selfishness. Yes, you have deep compassion, but you also have cold indifference. Yes, you're a healer, but you're also a potential destroyer. This is the full truth of being human. Jung's discovery wasn't that empaths are secretly evil. It was that empaths create the darkest shadows precisely because they try so hard to be light. The solution isn't to become dark, but to own your darkness. To know that you contain all possibilities, saint and sinner, healer and destroyer, compassion and cruelty. Your empath gifts are real, but so is your shadow. And until you integrate that shadow, you're not an evolved empath. You're a split person performing light while darkness grows in your basement. The world doesn't need more split empaths. It needs whole humans who can feel without drowning, care without compulsion, and help without martyring themselves. What shadow trait have you been denying? What darkness terrifies you most? Share below. Sometimes naming our shadows publicly is the first step to integration. And if you know an empath who's burning out, share this video. They might be ready to discover that their darkness is actually their path to wholeness. Remember, you're not just an empath. You're a whole human, containing whole possibilities. The question is, will you remain split in the light, or will you integrate into wholeness?